Thank you, guys. Well, don't thank me yet, and don't clap. Mess it up, right? But appreciate it anyway. So my name is Irakli. I work for API Academy. Matt probably has told you about API Academy already, but since it's been half a day, let me remind you. So API Academy is basically this group within CA that does a lot of research in the space of APIs and distributed systems. But we don't do this research in some secluded lab, some faraway place. The way we do this research is by working with some of the most exciting organizations, working on real-life problems, solving some of the most complex API problems in the field. So what I want to share with you today is some of the lessons that we learned about how to create successful API programs, right? And basically, I'm going to share with you 3 lessons that we learned as best practices of how you want to approach these things. But before I get into that, I want to make a disclaimer. A lot of people call APIs a lot of things, right? It's a pretty loaded term. So I want to be very clear what we're going to talk about in this conversation. So the APIs I'm going to talk to you about are specifically web APIs, right? These are not services in the enterprise integration. This is not about integrating your ERP system with your CRM system, with your accounting system. We're talking about web APIs. So we're talking about APIs that really became a thing around 2007 when Steve Jobs got on that stage in Cupertino and introduced a magnificent iPhone to us, and a year later, Android launched, and then we got Internet of Things. Like, that's the kind of APIs we're talking about, APIs that are targeting mobile devices that are deployed at very large distances. And they are very important, right? Eric already showed you this graph. There's really an explosive exponential growth in these APIs. This is why you guys are here. This is why we have a whole academy researching these things. This is an important field. And one way in which these web APIs are completely different from APIs before them, the web services, enterprise services, is who manages them, how they are managed, and how the most successful API programs approach their APIs, right? Because traditionally, the web services, enterprise services, were the concern of IT teams, right? It's where the engineers are taking care, creating capabilities so that the actual products then use APIs. But what we see now, which is very interesting, is that the most successful API programs now are managed as products in and of themselves. So APIs themselves are products. They're not enabling other products, and that's not their only role, but they can be products in and of themselves, which is kind of odd, right? So, well, let's look what the definition of a product is. And there are many definitions of a product, but I choose one from Wikipedia because crowdsourced knowledge is always correct, right? Anybody has ever read anything wrong on Wikipedia? Just don't tell me, right? So for what it's worth, this is how Wikipedia defines APIs. Products. A product is anything that can be offered to a market that might satisfy a want or a need, right? So do APIs match this definition? Well, APIs do have demand, APIs do have customers, and APIs can certainly be monetized, right? And if you don't believe me, we have this perfect example of a very successful monetization of just APIs, right? Eric mentioned Twilio. How many of you are actually familiar with Twilio, right? So for those of you, I'll repeat, and for those of you that may not be familiar, Twilio is basically a telecommunications API. What they allow you to do is to access some very easy-to-use API to send text messages, receive text messages, make calls, receive calls. It's basically a telecom API. And the reason it's important because that industry is extremely fragmented, right? If you have ever written code to send a text message, it's completely different. The code you have to write is completely different depending on whether you're sending a text message to Verizon customer or AT&T customer or whatnot, right? And that is partially why some of the websites, when they want to send you text alerts, will ask you, are you with AT&T or Verizon or T-Mobile or who are you with, right? So it's a fragmented space which is hard to work with. And what Twilio did is basically they hid all that complexity behind a very easy-to-use API. They do not operate any data switching centers or any telephony infrastructure. They do go to the same wholesale sellers of this infrastructure that anybody else goes. The only thing they did, they made it extremely easy, and they created an API which is their only product. They don't have mobile applications. They don't own infrastructure. The only product they have is the API. And they are incredibly successful. They make a lot of money. They are getting ready for IPO. They definitely were able to monetize that space, right? So this is a classic example of APIs are products in and of themselves, or at least can be products in and of themselves. Unfortunately, not every API story goes like that, right? So on that nice hockey stick graph, you have 10,000 APIs. Not all 10,000 of those are Twilio stories. As a matter of fact, unfortunately, the majority of these APIs are kind of the lone animal in the desert. Nobody cares about them. Nobody knows about them. They get no use. It's a sunk, wasted cost. And that's really sad, because as engineers, as product managers, the worst thing that can happen to us is we create something, we put all our soul in that something, and nobody is using it. That's really bad. So how can we avoid doing that? How can we create APIs that everybody loves? Well, we said that APIs are products, and that's great news. Because guess what? Product management as a science, and it is a science, has been around way before APIs or the web or even the internet. There's a lot we can learn from product management. So if we approach our APIs as products, there's some really good lessons we can use, and we have seen that the teams that use those lessons are extremely powerful with APIs. So let me give you some of the quotes that illustrate those lessons. So the first one comes from the guy called Dave McClure. He is a famous entrepreneur, now venture capitalist, the founder of 500 startups. So what he says is that the most important thing when you're creating a product, not just API, but any product, is to recognize that customers don't care about our solutions. Customers care about their problems. And unfortunately, we see that as a mistake made over and over again by a lot of API teams. They are so excited by the resource they have, by the data they have, that their entire API is about what they have, about their solution. And unfortunately, they don't take enough time to think about, well, what is the problem that the customer has? Does our solution match that problem? And it is not just Dave McClure. There's also, Holger mentioned Clayton Christensen. Clayton Christensen created this framework for how you create good products called Jobs to be Done framework, right? So basically what this framework does, it says that products are merely tools that you rent so you can get some jobs done. Products do not have value in and of themselves. What does that really mean? So example of what that means is, let's say you go to a hardware store. We don't do that much often anymore, but let's say you go to a hardware store and you buy a drill, right? Why would you buy a drill at a hardware store? Somebody help me out. Exactly. So you probably want a hole in the wall, right? So maybe you're hanging a nice piece of art or a mirror or something else, right? So what you want to get done is the hole in the wall. But what that also means that if Black & Decker spends all their innovation in creating the most perfect drill, right? And then somebody comes up with another way of getting that hole in the wall that does not involve the drill and is actually much easier, Black & Decker needs to shut down. Well, thankfully, they have other products, so they're probably not going to shut down, but you get the point. And this is not just a theoretical exercise. This has happened. This has happened between the floppy disks and then the USB drives. Nobody is carrying around floppy disks anymore, right? This happened with the laser printers and jet printers. Most jet printers can do what laser printers were doing before for much more price. It's very important to keep in mind that it's not all about our solutions. It's about what jobs people have to get done and if we address them. And I really enjoy putting my quotes next to the quotes of famous people, right? So you'll have to excuse me. And this is how we bring it back into the space of APIs, right? So unfortunately, what we see is a lot of people create their APIs as queries on their data, right? Data is the solution. They give you access to their data. Does that really solve anybody's problem? They do not take time to think about customer problems. And so that you don't blame me that it's just me, right, trying to tag along famous people, there's somebody much famous than me. It's Sam Newman, the guy who wrote the book about microservices. And watch what he's saying. I didn't copy him. My talk was before his book was published, so no plagiarism here. He said, I have seen too often that thinking about data leads to anemic, CRUD-based services, and that's bad. So ask first, what does this context do? And then, what data does it need to do that? So basically what he's saying in that part of the book is, think about the capabilities that you are providing. Do not start with data. And once you think about capabilities, you will find that maybe your data can provide that capability. A lot of times you will find that maybe you need to mesh up your data with somebody else's data set or create these connections between data sets. And then your API will be so much better. Will actually solve problems, right? Capabilities, jobs to get done, problems, not solutions. It's the same thing over and over again. So the lesson here is your API is not your data. Your API are the capabilities and the actions you provide. Data is how you do that. It's part of the equation. Do not start with data. Okay, so that was lesson number one. Now let's look at how APIs can provide us strategic leverage, right? We do APIs because they put us ahead of the competition. And my good friend Mehdi from the WebShell.io and API Days fame has identified like 3 major topics which help you get strategic leverage using APIs. One of the things that APIs do is by exposing APIs, you can transform your organization into a platform. So instead of being a single organization, you can create this ecosystem of companies that, through economic forces, can all make money on your platform. Facebook is a wonderful example of this, right? There are companies that have become billion-dollar companies by being on Facebook platform. Zynga comes to mind immediately, right? So instead of being this single destination social network like Google Plus or MySpace, they created a platform. They let others make money on their platform. And what happened then? What happened is that then all these companies are now invested in your success. So your success is not driven anymore by just your engineering, your sales, and your business development, but it's a cumulative effect of the engineering force, of the sales force, and the business development force of the entire ecosystem. And that cumulative effect is so strong that nobody is able to make a dent. MySpace is pretty much irrelevant. Google is putting all their resources into trying to tackle Facebook, right? And neither of these companies are able to match the cumulative power of the ecosystem that Facebook has created. This is really, really powerful. So from technical perspective, what APIs can do for you is that it can make your system very composable. It can allow customers to build, like a Lego system, the solution that actually works for them, rather than having to buy something off the shelf. And that effect can be so powerful that this startup Salesforce was able to compete in the CRM industry. CRM industry is one of the most ruthless industries, right? You have IBM, you have Oracle, you have SAP. The biggest software companies are there. But Salesforce, because it created a completely new kind of CRM, a composable CRM through APIs, was able to completely ignore the competition and create almost like a new market segment for itself. And Salesforce is so successful at this point that when the Dreamforce conference, the Salesforce conference happens in San Francisco, the entire city shuts down. You cannot get a ticket in, you cannot get a hotel reservation. It's like South by Southwest, but for the geeks. So that's also powerful. And last but not least, there's also a finance play in APIs, right? APIs can be a huge multiplier for your existing investment, right? Amazon had all these servers lying around just to be ready that on the peak sales periods during the Black Friday, holiday season, they would be able to take on the traffic, like 100 times more traffic than the usual, right? But most of 300 days out of 365 days of a year, those servers were just sitting idle. That was pretty expensive investment they had already made. And what they did is through APIs, they were able to rent out that investment. And how successful was that? So Amazon Web Services, Amazon Cloud is not a separate business, but if you estimate the value of that division of Amazon, that's about $4 billion revenue and about $20 billion worth of a company. That's a lot of money. I mean, for something that you're just renting out while you're not using it, that's a good change, right? I wish I had that kind of money. And it is something that we should also keep in mind for our own APIs. A lot of times we think in these buckets of private API versus partner API versus public API. Very useful model, because private APIs give us some freedoms that public APIs don't, yada, yada, yada. So it's a good model, but it's just a model. What you don't want to be doing is you don't want to assume that just because your API is a private API right now, it's going to be private API forever. You don't want to be doing anything that would prevent your private API from becoming a public API tomorrow, right? Because we have a lot of examples that you build something for yourself, and then it's so successful that your CEO plays golf with some other CEO, and the other CEO says, what if I pay you a lot of money? Would you let me use your API? And then it's for people to play golf, right? So it really accumulates very quickly, and now you have a partner API. And then it only takes so many partners for your API to actually become a public API. These things are fluid. Things do not stay in the same bucket. And we also know the examples of things going the other way around, right? Public APIs becoming private APIs. Much rare, but it also happens. So do not assume that your API is going to just stay in one bucket. Don't do anything in the design of your API that would prevent you from making it public, because you would be leaving money on the table. And if you're absolutely certain, like sometimes people tell me, Irakli, you don't understand. We know our business. We know this API will never become public. And to that I say, I'm sure you know your business way better than I do. All I know is APIs. But when you tell me that, please think of Amazon. Amazon exposed the most low-level, the most intimate in their business. They were an e-commerce website. And they exposed through their APIs their hardware resources, their disk space, their CPU, their memory, right? It doesn't get any lower than that. And they were able to make billions of dollars. So if you're absolutely certain that your private API will never monetize, then ignore me. But you might also be leaving a lot of money on the table. So as a general rule, maybe you don't want to be doing that. And the third lesson I want to share with you is probably the least conventional, but also probably the most powerful. It's called unbundling. I've heard it from Marc Andreessen. Maybe somebody else said it before. Nothing is new in this world, right? But because I got it from Marc Andreessen, how many people know who Marc Andreessen is, by the way? Marc Andreessen is basically, he was founder of Netscape, right? He sold Netscape to AOL, made millions of dollars, then used that money to start one of the most successful venture capital companies, Andreessen Horowitz, and that venture capital company basically got a cut of every internet success. So a guy that really understands the web, really understands online business, really understands how things work, and he thinks that this phenomenon of unbundling is one of the most powerful things online in the online business. So I want to share with you what we mean by that and how it has effect on your API thinking. So to explain what unbundling is, an example that Andreessen uses himself. So he goes kind of through the history of internet, and he describes how initially internet for us, at least in the United States, was AOL, right? AOL was your connection to the internet. It was all connected to the internet. It was everything you wanted on the internet. Email, chat, dating, blah, blah, blah. And then Yahoo came by, And Yahoo said, I don't really care how you connect to the internet, like use these DSL lines, whatever, but once you connect to the internet, I'm going to unbundle that part from AOL, and I'm going to do a really good job with it. And they actually did. And then Google came by, and Google said, well, this portal business is nice, but we really are only interested in the content discovery. So we're going to unbundle functionality, the content discovery functionality from Yahoo, and we're going to do a really good job at it, right? And Facebook came by, and kind of what they said was, well, Google can find anything, but it's kind of least common denominator thing, right? So we want to concentrate on reconnecting and finding important people in your life, your friends, your classmates, some of you may have not liked, but still, your family members. Basically, we're going to reconnect you with all these people. It's a people finder, right? So they unbundled find people from generic search. Now, what is important to notice here is that unbundling is not just mechanics of decoupling, right? It's not just separating something from the other. What it is liberating a smaller thing from the bigger picture so that then you can innovate on that thing, right? Once Google unbundled search from Yahoo, like Google is not just search anymore. Google is actually an advertising company, right? Once it had just search, then it could innovate on top of it and create the whole ad empire, right? So likewise, once Facebook unbundled people search, the basic functionality of reconnecting with people, right? The whole of Facebook graph, then they built the entire social network on top of it, right? They ended up with 3 major features. Image sharing, a lot of people share images using Facebook, activity stream, and chat. And Twitter, WhatsApp, and Instagram, the 3 companies unbundled all these 3 functions from Facebook, right? So what is interesting about Facebook is that Facebook was probably the first company that saw this happening, right? Yahoo never saw what Google was doing to it. Google probably never saw what Facebook was doing it. Facebook knew that unbundling was going on. And the reason we know Facebook knew the unbundling was going on is those completely crazy amounts of acquisitions at which Facebook has acquired Instagram and WhatsApp, right? $1 billion for zero revenue Instagram and $20 billion for non-profitable WhatsApp. Sounds crazy. But at least according to Marc Andreessen, the reason Facebook did this was because they knew these companies were unbundling it. They knew that they were not going to just stop at chat and the image sharing, that they were going to make them the next Google or Yahoo and AOL, and they didn't want to do that. They didn't want that to happen to them. And another reason why we know that Facebook probably saw this is what happened once the acquisition went through, right? Facebook acquires companies all the time, but usually the way it goes is they will absorb the product, completely shut down the product or make it assimilate into the main product offering. It's basically like acqui-hire, right? That did not happen with Instagram or WhatsApp. Basically, Facebook bought them and then pretty much did not touch them at all. They're not integrated with Facebook. They are not branded as Facebook. Why? Because Facebook does not want to stop that unbundling process. Facebook does want to get disrupted. If Instagram does not disrupt Facebook, somebody else will. If WhatsApp does not disrupt Facebook, somebody else will. So they want to give these companies the chance to continue disrupting and unbundling Facebook, except they want to own their success. So in case they were able to really make Facebook into the next AOL, well, guess what? All that revenue comes to Facebook. Right? So that's what's happening here. It's interesting. And it is so interesting and so powerful that according to Marc Andreessen, I want to reiterate, the most successful venture capitalist in the online business, he says that this is the most important pattern that they try to follow in their investment. He says, this is the pattern that we love to fund, unbundle X from Y, but then use the liberation of X as leverage to do amazing new things with X. It's not just separation. It's a liberation so then you can innovate. So how does this relate at all with APIs? Well, the way it relates back to APIs, remember I put my quotes next to famous people, right? So the way this directly relates to APIs is that what is the most unbundled form of your products? It's your APIs, right? So what you can do with your APIs, you can pre-unbundle yourself, right, before somebody else unbundles you, and then create an incentive for all these people, all these organizations, all these startups trying to disrupt you to actually use your API in unbundling you, right? Imagine if Yahoo had a search API, a very good search API that Google could have used to create search. And then maybe Google wouldn't have bothered to create a search engine, but they would have just concentrated on ad business. And then Yahoo would be getting a cut of it, right? Because they're using their API. It's not crazy. It is exactly what Facebook is doing through app market, right? They could have tried to create all the features that you need for a good social network with their own engineering team. After all, that's what Google is trying to do in Google+, failing, right? But Facebook said, no, we're going to forego all this additional marginal revenue. We're going to let other people make billions of dollars of revenue using our APIs. Because when they unbundle us, they're not unbundling us by just leaving us on the side. They're unbundling us, and we get the cut of all their success. Apple is doing the same thing. Apple could have created all their apps for iPhone themselves. No. They're letting other companies sell the apps, and then they get a cut from each sale. This is what APIs allow you to do. It allows you, if you play it right, to get ahead of the most important trend in online business, unbundling, and be in charge of it rather than being surprised by it. So, in summary, there are 3 quick lessons I wanted to share with you today. Right? Manage your APIs as products. Do not just treat them as data sources. Think about capabilities, design them as products, put product managers to manage your products. APIs are strategic leverages. I told you about 3 ways you can leverage APIs in great ways. There are probably more. And APIs can be an extremely effective tool in controlling the unbundling. And Charles Darwin said that the species that survived through evolution were not the smartest or the strongest. They were the most adaptable, right? Change is inevitable. Your disruption is inevitable. The question is, will you control that flow, or will you be surprised by it? Thank you very much.
Thank you.